I made a video a while back talking about the Penacony quest as a whole, and I had a segment where I talked about Sunday. I'm going to go through that segment and talk a little more and explain some things that I don't think I did a great job explaining because I like things to make sense. Anyways, let's talk about this. We all know that Sunday was enveloped in Christian motifs. The entire story was. But the fact that he follows Ena made it difficult for me not to connect his character with the ideas of Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophy. Okay, so Neoplatonic philosophy and Platonic philosophy also are very influential to Christianity, but the common understanding of Christianity has sort of moved away from these ideas, and this is what I'm going to be talking about in the video. The word Ena, which we know is the name for the aeon of order, is actually the Greek word for one, and the ancient Greeks were obsessed with the number one. One of the biggest names in Neoplatonic philosophy, which was simply considered Platonic philosophy at the time, is Plotinus. And he is the figure behind the combining of Platonic and Christian thought because of his stance on the one. In his philosophy, the one is sometimes identical with order, unity, goodness, and perfection. So when we say the one is synonymous with all that, that's all attributes that can be attributed to God. In this kind of philosophy, they're not trying to figure out what is God, they're more trying to figure out what is the metaphysical foundation for reality. So why do things exist? And then that becomes God. To be something is to be intelligible, which is basically just to be able to be comprehended. There's a lot of focus on rationality in these philosophies. And so intelligibility then starts to equate to order, because intelligibility is to have some sort of reason behind things, and that's what order is. Order is the reason behind things which allows us to understand them. And so that's what this perfection is. So this piece of dialogue, he says, when nature is always accompanied by predation and sacrifice, its antithesis is known as order. This reminds me a bit of answers to the problem of evil, which is how does evil come about? And it's said to be through the absence of good. Order becomes goodness because order is perfection, and so the lack of this order is evil, and so this is also can be called chaos. So evil is then not a thing in itself, but it is simply the lack of good. And because only one thing, only the one, can be this perfection, everything which comes from it is going to be imperfect and subject to disorder. With the development of Christianity, the one becomes God. This is what's meant by divine simplicity. God's being or nature is to be. God is not a composite, but pure oneness and completely essential. Every property of God is necessary, meaning that no quality of God is accident. So this is one of the things especially that I wanted to talk about again, which is that I say that God's essence is to be. So there's a common sentiment in a lot of ancient Greek philosophy, specifically in Aristotle actually, that everything has this telos or end, a goal or a purpose you might call it, and everything strives for that purpose, but that purpose, that end, once it reaches it, it's perfected in some way. And so while things in the material world cannot be perfected, God, which transcends this, is perfection itself. So what can God be such that God is perfect and always, always having achieved that telos? So the only telos that God can have, and when we say God, we're still talking about the metaphysical foundation for reality, why things exist, is to be, because that's always achieved. And even saying achieved makes it sound so much like a process, which it's not, because God can't change. When I say essence, it's the purpose or the telos. And when I say to be, I just mean being, pure being. And what God is, being, is this order, is this intelligibility, sort of like the blueprint behind reality. And that God must be. God's essence is existence. Everything in existence emanates from the one, physical and non-physical. I also mentioned briefly, not even verbally, but in text, This is why Nihility's nothingness poses an issue for the sweet dream. And that goes back to what I was saying before about evil being the lack of good. This nothingness is in stark contrast to what the one is and what it says about existence. I should also mention that elation, as it stands for this sort of chaos and unintelligibility, is also in direct contrast, so this makes Sparkle's part very fitting as well. Matter is not looked upon too highly. It usually isn't in ancient and medieval philosophies. So again, what he says here, it's not forsaking but transcending flesh, blood, sorrow, weakness. If the physical is the root of spiritual suffering, it's only logical that we defeat it. This line, I think, is very in line with Platonic and Neoplatonic thought, which is that we are turning away from the imperfect material world. I think this line sums that up pretty well. Especially if you're going to look into the philosophy of St. Augustine, for example. He makes sure to point out that the material world isn't to be forsaken because it still comes from the one, and it still does have these elements of order and intelligibility, which he equates to beauty. But there is something higher than that, which we should strive to become close with. But that's no reason to fear, because humans have souls and are intelligent. Or we emanate from divine intellect, or nous, which itself emanates from the one. When we say that everything emanates from the one, this word is, more simply put, I guess you could say that everything comes from the one. The one creates, and that's a similar idea to in Christianity. That's one of the things that Christianity has taken from Neoplatonist thought, because this one provides the blueprints, the underlying reality for all material things. And like in Platonic philosophy, material is not like the realest thing that there is. Basically, we have an immaterial nature which can help us reach the one. God is in all of us. We can see now that Sunday's devotion to Robin and his obsession with the one's ability to create a paradise leads him to essentially sacrificing himself to the material world of awakening to preserve his divine world of the sweet dream. If this reminds you of a very important story in the Bible, then we're thinking about the same thing. This is when it becomes more of like what you know from modern day Christianity, which is that Sunday is in my opinion, I think he's very much a Christ-like figure, and I think a lot of people probably agree with that. I don't think that's a controversial claim at all. But along the lines of what I said there, I think it's significant. The dream which he wishes to maintain is something that is not a corporeal world, something that's beyond that. It's this idea that the essence of the human, or the purpose, right, the telos, is to reach for the divine and try to connect with it in some way. And it's through soul that we do that. And in this sense, we can see how in his eyes, the sweet dream is like what he believes our souls must achieve as their nature flows upwards towards the one. The sweet dream may not merely be escapism for him, but man cannot achieve salvation on their own. This is when I think his thought becomes a little more modernized, which is placing this emphasis on faith. True goodness can only be achieved through faith. This is actually counter to a lot of ancient philosophy, which is this idea that true goodness cannot be achieved through faith alone, but also that there's this reason which we need to uncover, and by contemplation we've reached that. So this is actually something that's takes a little different vein of thought from the other influences which I personally see in this character that may be entirely incidental. And his belief that we can transcend our imperfect human nature in such a way leads to his downfall. He idolizes this oneness so much that in desperation to save others and make good on his promise to Robin, he aims to create the paradise of the one himself. So I think when he says through harmony we obtain order is very interesting, because harmony is, it takes pieces, and pieces we know cannot be perfect, because that's then you have a composite, not simply a whole that is one. So you'll take all these imperfect pieces and make them work together, which is what happens in the material world that we all live in. But through contemplation, you can obtain order. So I think this is kind of in line with what he says here. Anyways, I hope that clears things up a little bit. I really enjoyed this character, and I realize that I'm probably reading way farther into this than the people who wrote him did, but I think with any look that we take at Christianity, we're still going to find these influences, and I really enjoyed this. So that's all I have, but if you enjoyed this video, leave a like or a comment. I'm also on Twitch, that link will be in the description, and whatever you want to do, do it well, and please be nice.